Again, let's dive right in because we've got two games this weekend in the Magnolia State that feel like they are really, really big. We'll start in Oxford, which is where you're going to be this weekend, Ole Miss and Kentucky. Give me a high-level thought on this game, and then we'll drill down just a little bit.
Well, that's a dangerous thing to ask for me. I'll give you a thought, and then you can just tell me if it was high level or not. I'll say
okay,
that.
That's fair. That's fair.
I looked at this one. We broke it down last night on the show, but I'm really convinced just turnovers are flat out going to decide the game. Now, they do a lot, but they're randomized. And I'm not saying I have a prediction on who's turning what over in this game, but when you look at so far this year, Kentucky having allowed 16 sacks, and when you think about the duress that if you duplicate that this Saturday puts Will Levis under, and the fact that they, even with Chris Rodriguez, probably can't run the ball 4.5 or 5 yards per carry, which is what they would need to do for the ground game to take over, it just lends itself to seeing a lot of second and long, third and long, obvious passing down situations, and with the ball in the air, him under duress, could easily see Kentucky turn the ball over. I also have listened to Lane Kiffin and actually think he's serious when he talks about some of the decision-making issues that you've seen from not only Jackson Dart, but Luke Altmaier when he's been in. And you haven't really had to pay for him in the form of a loss because the competition's been a little inferior. Well, the competition's not inferior Saturday. And so both ways, I really think, man, I would be very surprised if we got to the end of this one and it was a nice, clean, no-turnover game and someone just flat-out out-executed the other. I really think turnovers are deciding that game.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. There are a couple of things that stand out. So Ole Miss, with the way that they've run the ball, and it shouldn't be a surprise that Ole Miss is running the football well. Back-to-back years, Lane Kiffin offenses have led the SEC in rushing yards per game, and I feel like people always lose sight of that. It's like, oh, Lane Kiffin just throws the football, but that's really not offensively what he does primarily. So Mark Stoops is going to look at that and goes, okay, we can't let Ole Miss go out and run for 300 yards for us. So if they're going to stack the box and try to take away the run, does that not then heighten the pressure on Jackson Dart to have a better game, making good decisions, and then also force Ole Miss to maybe get Michael Trigg more involved over the middle than they've done in the first few games?
Yes, I absolutely think that's reasonable. I mean, it's reasonable to expect Mark Stoops to look at Ole Miss the same way he looked at Florida. You know, Florida had marginal success running the ball, but at the end of the day, they made Anthony Richardson try and beat them. Now, Richardson didn't know where the ball was even going once it left his hand that night. We remember how it ultimately turned out. With Ole Miss, you know, you've probably got the same thing, and you're probably going to have to prove in man coverage that your guys can beat their guys. I think Kentucky is perfectly fine at the end of the day tipping their cap to you if poise and precision in the passing game is what beats them. What they're not fine with is death by 1,000 paper cuts on the ground. And so, yeah, I think you're absolutely right there.
How did we get to this point with Kentucky's offensive line? You know, they've been so good. So Kentucky historically has not been great on the offensive line, but under John Schlarman, rest his soul, they developed an identity and an attitude, and they were putting guys in the NFL, sometimes multiple guys, year after year after year. Have they lost some of that identity? Is it just a case of that's an area where they've got to kind of circle back on the recruiting front? Because I feel like this is not the nasty group up front on the offensive line that Kentucky's had for the last handful of years.
You're right, and it's what gives me trepidation anytime I pick them, is some of the things you've come to rely on with Kentucky. You're misguided if you think you can still rely on them. You said that a lot of people nationally falsely just attribute high-octane passing to Lane Kiffin, and you're right about that. Nationally, people also think about Kentucky and just say, oh, that's a ground-and-pound offense. Well, no, it's not. Yeah. They have not run the ball well at all, and you just cited the reason why. What I think is it's not any one big secret or glaring issue. I just think it's a cyclical thing that if you're at a major program, you can fix immediately through the transfer portal. But if you're at Kentucky, sometimes you just got to bite the bullet on one of these seasons or two of these seasons and dedicate yourself to rebuilding that position, which they have to do right now. In the meantime, they got to try and work around it.
Josh, let's switch gears and head down to Starkville for Mississippi State, Texas A&M. We were just talking about this game, and the consensus we have is we don't trust either team. We really don't trust Texas A&M. We don't trust Mississippi State. State's at home. Rogers probably the better quarterback. Give us somebody to trust in this game.
Well, so I think that's a really good way to put it. I was curious what line they would hang on this game after they favored Mississippi State at LSU, and they ended up getting outscored pretty decisively in the second half. I was very interested what kind of adjustment there would be in the odds-making community. And there really wasn't a big one. And that's why you saw State open as a favorite. The market has bet them up over 3 points as a favorite. And so there are a lot of things that the data community and the odds-making community, and I'm there with them, think we know about Mississippi State. But that's not where games are played. They're not played on a board or on paper. You have to do it on the field on Saturdays. And I think it's such a huge game for both teams for obvious reasons. But if Mississippi State were to drop this game this Saturday, I think that's the time where you start to readjust, you start to recalibrate, you start to ask yourself, maybe I was a little wrong on them, where was I too high? But it also has the shot on the other side of the coin to really change some things in this conference. Because if Mississippi State wins the game, then you're upping them a tier on everyone's expectation level the rest of the year. But also, think about what that does. If you put a second loss on A&M's resume before they even play that Bama game next week, that is a massive storyline, talking point, whatever you want to talk about next week. Now, I don't know if I just instilled confidence or trust in either team because I don't have it either. I think that Mississippi State's best ball is still in them. I'll just put it that way.
You know, Josh, when we look at kind of college football across the board, and maybe I've got short-term memory loss or long-term memory loss, but I feel like this is one of those years where, you know, sometimes it's hard to say I don't know and that be an acceptable answer, but I feel like there are a lot of teams that we look at across the country, and a month into the season, my reaction is still, I don't know. I don't know yet. I feel like this week and next week we really start to kind of solidify some of those opinions. Do you fall into that category, or do you think I'm off base there?
No, absolutely. I mean, I did an illustration of this last night on the show. We put out our power ratings, and it's just database. That's all it is. And I'm telling you, I've never really seen college football set up like this. So we got, I think it was Bama, Ohio State, Georgia in that order, 1, 2, and 3. But the point is the order is irrelevant because there's a grand total of a 2.5-point gap between 1 and 3. So essentially they're just the same team on a neutral field. Then there is a 14-point gap between 3 and 4. So there's a massive fall-off after the top 3. But here's the craziest part. From 4 to 25, there's a 7-point gap. So that 4 to 25 range, the gap is half as much as the gap between 3 and 4. And what that means is just you've got a jumbled hodgepodge where 19 and 11 or 8 and 22, there's not a big separation between them. And that means you just get chaos every Saturday. And then you shuffle it up and you throw it back out there and you get chaos again. And it's really dangerous. Like you just said, be careful making definitive statements about this sport this year, especially in September or early October, because there is so much that still has to sort itself out.
All right, so as a consumer of college football, I love that, right? I wish there wasn't the big gap between 3 and 4, but the fact that it's so tight, 4 through 24 or 25, whatever the number was you said there, I absolutely love that. But to me, the follow-up question to that is why? In your opinion, why have we gotten to that point where we've got 20 teams that are separated by 7 points?
Well, to me, it all goes back to quarterback recruiting and development. And Clemson in some years would be in this conversation too. They're not right now. But you're talking about Ohio State, you're talking about Georgia, you're talking about Bama. And two of those have perennially now for a while put Heisman caliber, first, second round NFL caliber talent on the field at quarterback. Georgia is just an exception to the rule in that they have such a powerful roster and put together a generational defense last year that they're the exception to that rule. But by and large, you look at the shift with Bama into this different stratosphere. It happened.
Josh, we got 30 seconds left.
Quarterback. Yeah, Ohio State, same thing. Clemson. It wasn't until Deshaun Watson came along when they shifted as a program up into title contention. It sounds so easy because it's one position, but it's also that hard because there are so few of those guys out there.